I'm sure you have seen people use sign language before, and sometimes we see it on TV when there's a person using sign language alongside the spoken language that is usually used on TV. Did you know that for a long time, linguists did not regard the sign language as a language, but they regarded it as a heresy? Of course, they have changed their opinion now, as we will see. But did you know that you can use ASL or American Sign Language to communicate subtle shades of meaning just the same way you would do when using a spoken language? Did you know that deaf babies of deaf parents babble in sign? Well, join me in this new word power episode from English Plus Podcast where we will talk about the language of sign. And since it's a word power episode, we're going to discuss the meaning of 10 key words later. This is your host, Danny, and this is a new Word Power episode from English Plus Podcast. So, we will talk about the language of sign, but before we start with our topic for today, let me remind you that you can practice what you're about to learn in this episode on my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. In the show notes, you will find a link that will take you to the custom post I have created specifically for this episode with interactive activities and a PDF downloadable worksheet you can use to practice further with fun activities. And within the PDF practice worksheet, there will be a part where you can practice words from the previous 4 Word Power episodes. So don't miss out on this great opportunity to practice what you learn, as this is indeed the only way you can retain the words and add them to your permanent active vocabulary bank. And now, without further ado, let's start talking about the language of sign. When American Sign Language, or ASL, was introduced in the early 1800s, it was regarded as no more than a form of Pidgin English. However, it differed from other forms of Pidgin English in that it consisted of a combination of gestures that looked like the ideas or words the gestures were supposed to represent. Assuming that language must be based on speech or modulations of sound, linguists regarded as heresy the notion that signed languages are natural languages like English, French, and Chinese. In the past 20 years, however, linguists have acknowledged that signed languages like ASL are as powerful and intricately structured as spoken ones, and that they are capable of expressing the subtle shades of meaning possible with spoken languages. Just as speakers combine meaningless bits of sound into meaningful words, signers unite individually meaningless hand and body movements into words, then choose from a palette of assorted hand shapes, such as a fist or a pointed index finger. They also choose where to make a sign and how to orient the hand and the arm. Each shape and position provides context clues to the intended meaning. Furthermore, ASL has a key language ingredient, a grammar to regulate its flow. For example, a signer might make the sign for, say, Jane at some point in space. By pointing to that spot later, the signer creates the pronoun she or her, meaning Jane. A sign moving toward the spot means something done to her, and a sign moving away from the spot means an action done by her. Facial expressions and head movements also function as grammatical markers, providing crucial linguistic information. A head tilted forward and raised eyebrows, for instance, turn a statement into a question. This complex system of gestures sheds new light on the old scientific controversy over whether language is an innate human instinct or learned behavior. Linguists have reasoned that if ASL is a true language, unconnected to speech, then our proclivity for language must be built in at birth, whether we express it with our tongue or with our hands. The work of research psychologists supports this belief. Deaf babies of deaf parents babble in sign. Just as hearing infants create nonsense sounds as their first attempts at language, so too do deaf babies, but they do it with their hands. Their systematic hand and finger movements, totally unlike those of hearing children, are a way of exploring the linguistic units that will be the building blocks of their language. Like any living language, ASL is a dynamic and continues to evolve. For example, terms that were visual representations of ethnic stereotypes have been replaced by finely tuned, sensitized signs. The language of sign is hardly silent. Instead, it is alive with unique patterns that communicate meaning. So that was the language of sign. I hope you learned a thing or two about the language of sign that you didn't know about before. And now, let's move on to talk about the 10 words that we're going to focus on in this Word Power episode. First, let me tell you about these words. These words are pigeon, linguist, heresy, subtle, palette, orient, crucial, innate, proclivity, and dynamic. So first, before I start telling you about the meaning of these words in detail as usual, we're going to have a very short game where I'm going to ask you some questions, give you the context of the words, and ask you a question, giving you 4 options to choose from, and then some time to think about it. Of course, you can pause the episode to think more, but the whole thing is supposed to help you guess the meaning of these words from context. Remember, I told you many times before that even if the word is new, it is always a good idea to try to figure out the meaning of a word from the context. So try and do that. And of course, don't worry, as usual, I will always talk in detail about these 10 words after we finish this little game of ours. All right, are you ready? Let's start with our very first word, pigeon. So don't go away, that's coming next. So our first word is pigeon. Well, it is not the bird, it is spelled P-I-D-G-I-N, pigeon. Well, let's take a look at how we used it in context. We said when American Sign Language was introduced in the early 1800s, it was regarded as no more than a form of pidgin English. So what does that mean? I'll give you now 4 options and some time to think about the right answer. In our context, pidgin means modern, a simplified blend of languages, a tendency to spread, or dependent on birds. Think about it, and I'll come back with the answer. For those of you who chose a simplified blend of languages, you're absolutely right, because that is what it means in this context. That's what pidgin means in this context. Now let's move on to the next word, and our next word is linguist. Now let's see how we used it in context. We said, assuming that language must be based on speech or modulations of sound, linguists regarded as heresy the notion that signed languages are natural languages like English, French, and Chinese. So what does that mean? Now, linguists can be best described as what? As people who study language, as diplomats, as historians, or as computer operators. Think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. So for those of you who thought people who study language, you're absolutely right, because that's what a linguist is. Linguists are people who study language. Can't be easier than that, right? And now let's move on to the next word, heresy. And here it's within the same context we used for linguists. We said assuming that language must be based on speech or modulations of sound, linguists regarded as heresy the notion that signed languages are natural languages like English, French, and Chinese. So, which words could best replace heresy in this context? Can we use a brilliant discovery, an opinion opposed to established views, scientifically accurate, or a logical conclusion? Think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. For those of you who chose an opinion opposed to established views, you're absolutely right, because that is the right answer. Now, before we move on to the next word, let me remind you again that don't worry, we're not going to stop here. I'm going to talk in detail about all these words just after we finished our little game here. All right? Now let's move on to the next word, subtle. How do we use this word? We said in the past 20 years, however, linguists have acknowledged that signed languages like ASL are as powerful and intricately structured as spoken ones, and that they are capable of expressing the subtle shades of meaning possible with spoken languages. So that is the context. What does subtle mean? Subtle shades of meaning are difficult to detect, have a smooth surface, deviate from the normal, or are immediately obvious. Which one is it? Are they difficult to detect? Do they have a smooth surface? Do they deviate from the normal, or are they immediately obvious? The word is subtle. Remember, think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. So for those of you who chose are difficult to detect, you're absolutely right. That's the right answer. And now let's move to the next word, palette. But first, let's take a look at how we use that in context. We said they choose from a palette of assorted hand shapes, such as a fist or a pointed index finger. So what is a palette here? It can be best explained as what? A mysterious arrangement, a short essay, a style of writing, or a range of choices. What do you think the answer is? Think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. So for those of you who chose the last one, range of choices, you're absolutely right, because that is what it exactly means in this context. And now let's move on to the next word, orient. Now let's see how we use that in context. We said they also choose where to make a sign and how to orient the hand and the arm. Now, which words could best replace orient in this context? Can we replace this word with mold with precision, distribute widely, align or position, or bear the weight of? Which one is the answer? Think about it, and I'll be right back with the answer. For those of you who chose align or position, you're absolutely right, because that is the answer. And now let's move on to talk about crucial. That's our next word. Let's see how we use that in our context. We said facial expressions and head movements also function as grammatical markers, providing crucial linguistic information. So, which word or words could best replace crucial in this context? Can we replace crucial with unimportant, extremely significant, low in rank, or lacking energy? What do you think the answer is? Think about it, and I'll be right back. For those of you who thought extremely significant, that is the right answer. And now let's move on to the next word, innate. That's, by the way, I-N-N-A-T-E. And for those of you who are kind of worried about me not telling you the spelling of these words, don't worry, because that's what I will do right after we finish our little game and we talk about these words in detail. All right? So this word, innate, let's see how we use that in context. We said this complex system of gestures shed new light on the old scientific controversy over whether language is an innate human instinct or learned behavior. So what do you think innate means? Does it mean connected by links, unnoticed, possessed at birth, or repetitive? Which one is it? Think about it, and I'll be right back. For those of you who thought possessed at birth, you're absolutely right, because that is the right answer. And that brings me to the last two words in our little game, proclivity and dynamic. Let's start with proclivity. How do we use that in context? We said linguists have reasoned that if ASL is a true language, unconnected to speech, then our proclivity for language must be built in at birth, whether we express it with our tongue or with our hands. So what is the meaning of proclivity? Well, proclivity can be best explained as what? A natural tendency, a dislike, an inability to master, or a deficiency. What do you think that is? Think about it, and I'll be right back. Now, for those of you who thought a natural tendency, you're absolutely right, because that's what it means in this context. And now for our last word, dynamic. Let's see how we use that in context. We said, like any living language, ASL is dynamic and continues to evolve. So which word or words can we use to replace dynamic in this context? And we say peculiar, tending to hold persistently to something, extremely loud, or characterized by continuous change or activity. What do you think the answer is? Think about it, and I'll be right back. For those of you who chose characterized by continuous change or activity, you're absolutely right. That's what dynamic is. And that's it for our game. I hope you enjoyed this little game. And this game is very important because I don't want you to depend on me like 100% to tell you the meanings of these words and everything. You need to depend on yourself first, and you need to try and guess the meaning of this word, especially from the context. You can see some context clues that help you decipher the meaning of the words, and that will all help you remember these words for longer and be able to use these words yourselves, add them to your active vocabulary bank. And now, of course, as I promise, I always have the part where I explain all the words in detail as we usually do, and that's what we're going to do next. I'm going to talk about the 10 words. Let me remind you again, these words are pigeon, linguist, heresy, subtle, palette, orient, crucial, innate, proclivity, and dynamic. That's coming next. Don't go away. I'll be talking in detail about these words. That's what we're going to do next. So let's start with the very first word, pigeon. It's P-I-D-G-I-N, pigeon. How do we use that in context? We said when American Sign Language, ASL, was introduced in the early 1800s, it was regarded as no more than a form of Pidgin English. Now, what does that mean? Now, Pidgin is a simple form of a language which speakers of a different language use to communicate. Now, Pidgin is not anyone's first language. You have to think about it this way. So that was the controversy back in the 1800s, and even well into the 1900s as well. They thought this ASL or those sign languages, these were just Pidgin languages, not real languages. They thought it was a form of Pidgin English, not your first language. And they were wrong, of course, and now they admit it. So remember, if someone is speaking their own language simply or another language badly and is trying to communicate, you can say that they are speaking, for example, Pidgin English or Pidgin Italian or Pidgin any language. That's the meaning of Pidgin. I hope you like this word. It's new, it's interesting. You might add it to your language. But of course, since a lot of listeners want to improve their English, you don't have to be worried about using Pidgin English when you want to start out. Start out with Pidgin English and your English will be a lot better as you practice more. So don't worry if this word applies to your language at the moment. That's not a big problem because it can always develop. It can always become better and better until you can communicate freely and fluently. Now, let's move on to the next word, linguist. That's L-I-N-G-U-I-S-T, linguist. Now, let's see how we use that in context. We said, assuming that language must be based on speech or modulations of sound, linguists regarded as heresy the notion that signed languages are natural languages like English, French, and Chinese. Now, a linguist is a person who studies or teaches linguistics. A person who studies this like a researcher or something, or even teaches that at university or even at schools, although it's not that popular because usually linguistics is something that you start learning at university. But anyway, that's the meaning of linguist in our context. And now let's move to the next word, heresy. In the same context, we said, assuming that language must be based on speech or modulations of sound, linguists regarded as heresy the notion that signed languages are natural languages like English, French, or Chinese. Now here, when some people said that sign language is the same just like English, French, and Chinese, those linguists regarded this idea as heresy. H-E-R-E-S-Y, heresy. What does that mean? Now, heresy is a belief or action that most people think is wrong because it disagrees with beliefs that are generally accepted. Now, of course, we can use that in a religious context, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be in a religious context. It can be used in anything, just like in our context here. They thought this idea was heresy. They regarded it as heresy, unacceptable because it is against common beliefs, against what is generally accepted. And if history told us anything, it told us that usually these ideas turn out to be true and then people start to believe them. So any good idea that starts against the common trends and tide or current or whatever you might call it, they face a lot of opposition, and some people might even regard these ideas as heresy, this word that we have here, but eventually they turn out to be the right ideas, and people don't regard them as heresy anymore, and they start to accept them. So that is our word heresy, and let's move on to talk about the next word, subtle, and that's what we're going to do next. We're going to talk about subtle, palette, and orient. Don't go away, I'll be right back. So our next word is subtle. It's S-U-B-T-L-E, but the B is silent, so we say subtle. How do we use that in context? We said in the past 20 years, however, linguists have acknowledged that signed languages like ASL are as powerful and intricately structured as spoken ones, and that they are capable of expressing the subtle shades of meaning possible with spoken languages. Now, when we say something is subtle, what does that mean? That means it's not immediately obvious or noticeable. And we use that for smells, tastes, sounds, colors, and even in our context, meanings or shades of meaning. When we say that we have a subtle smell or subtle taste or subtle sound, we mean these are pleasantly complex and delicate. And we know that we can achieve that with spoken languages. And not everybody can achieve that, of course. Even if you speak a language, those subtle nuances, those subtle changes or subtle shades of meaning is something that not everybody can do, but we all know it is possible with the spoken language. But what you might have learned about today, that this is also possible with ASL or American Sign Language. Those subtle shades of meaning can be expressed using ASL as well as spoken languages. So that was our word, subtle. What about the next word, palette? P-A-L-E-T-T-E. Let's see how we use that in context. We said they choose from a palette of assorted hand shapes, such as a fist or a pointed index finger. Now, when we say palette here, of course, it has to do with paints, but we're talking about a range of choices here. Now, when we talk about palette, we're talking about a range of colors that are used by a particular artist or group of artists as their palette, when we talk about it this way. Now, that is the palette usually. But when we use it in context like this one, they choose from a palette of assorted hand shapes. We're not talking about colors anymore. We're talking about a range of choices, just like the color choices we have for artists. Here, it's a range of choices of hand shapes like fist or pointed index finger, among others. So, that is the meaning of palette in context. You can see the richness of the language, that we don't use the words just in the way they are defined in a dictionary or something. We can use them in different contexts, and that teaches us about using other words in other contexts, and it will be possible. Don't be afraid to be adventurous and use these words in different contexts and see if they work or not. And soon enough, you will even know that this sounds natural and this doesn't sound natural. You can get there, but let's get back to the words we're talking about, and our next word is orient. O-R-I-E-N-T. How do we use that in context? We said they also choose where to make a sign and how to orient the hand and the arm. Now, when you orient yourself, you find out exactly where you are and which direction you're facing in. Now, that is the meaning of orient. But when we talk about orient in this context, we're talking about alignment and positioning. Aligning and positioning your hands, your arm. That's what we mean by orient. But orient is a little bit more than that, as you know, right? Think about orient and direction, and you will remember exactly how to use this word as a verb in our context. And now we have 4 more words to talk about: crucial, innate, proclivity, and dynamic. That's what we're going to do next. Don't go away. So let's start with crucial. Now, how do we use that in context? We said facial expressions and head movements also function as grammatical markers, providing crucial linguistic information. Now, first, just let me tell you that crucial is C-R-U-C-I-L, crucial. Now, here, if you describe something as crucial, you mean it is extremely important, it is vital, it is pressing, it is essential. That is crucial. So, here, providing crucial linguistic information, very important, extremely important linguistic information. That's the meaning of crucial. What about innate? I-N-N-A-T-E. Let's see how we use that in context. We said, this complex system of gestures sheds new light on the old scientific controversy over whether language is an innate human instinct or learned behavior. So what does that mean? An innate quality or ability, what does that mean? Well, that talks about something you are born with. An innate quality or ability is one which a person is born with. Like when we talk about natural abilities or inherent abilities or inborn abilities. That's also another word, innate ability. And here, of course, we said innate human instinct, something we are born with. So that is our word innate. Now for our next word, proclivity. Proclivity. How do we use that in context? We said linguists have reasoned that if ASL is a true language unconnected to speech, then our proclivity for language must be built in at birth, whether we express it with our tongue or with our hands. So what does that mean when we talk about proclivity? Well, a proclivity is a tendency to behave in a particular way or to like a particular thing. That's our proclivity. We're just talking about our tendencies or inclination. So that is our word, proclivity. And remember the context, that will help you a lot. Remember what this word means. And we have our final word for today, and that's dynamic, D-Y-N-A-M-I-C, dynamic. We said like any living language, ASL is dynamic and continues to evolve. What does that mean? If you describe something as dynamic, you approve of it because it is very active and energetic. But by the way, remember we can use this word with people as well. If you describe someone as dynamic, you approve of them because they are full of energy or full of new and exciting ideas. So that is the meaning of dynamic. And that brings me to the end of our 10 words for today and our very interesting topic, the language of sign. And now let me remind you with the 10 words we discussed in today's context. We talked about pigeon, linguist, heresy, subtle, palette, orient, crucial, innate, proclivity, and dynamic. You should add these 10 words to your active vocabulary bank, and I can help you with that. There's a link in the show notes that will take you to my website, EnglishPlusPodcast.com. There you will find all the activities you need to make sure you never forget these words. I have added interactive activities if you're a fan of doing things online, and I have also added a PDF practice worksheet. If you like working on paper, you can download the PDF. There's practice for the 10 words we learned in this episode, and there's also practice for the previous 4 word power episodes, so you will have a chance also to review the words we learned in earlier episodes, and that will only take your vocabulary knowledge to the next level. Don't miss out on this opportunity. Go to the website, go to this specific custom post I created for this episode, and make the best of this episode. Now, with that being said, this is everything for today. I hope you liked the episode. I hope you liked the topic and the words, and we'll meet again in other Word Power episodes. This is your host, Danny. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.